a lot of reasons, and I know I'm feeling some exhaustion and a lot of emotions all coming together all at once. So I think we can be brief. And I know Kelly has a garden that awaits her, and I am sure Richard has a lot to do. So I guess the purpose of this is just to hear a little bit about your experiences today in this historic moment of still having an in-person election despite a pandemic going on and shelter at home orders still standing. So I guess, Kelly, I'd love to hear from you. This was your first time ever working as a poll worker, and you felt the call and stepped up. How did that go for you today? Did you feel safe? How are you feeling now?
Yeah, I felt pretty safe. My ward is not very crowded, and so there were never hardly any voters there at any one time. There's most of the time there were no voters there at all. We had about a dozen poll workers there, so I was definitely in closer proximity to the poll workers than I was to any voters. All the poll workers wore masks that were donated by some paramedics that were good cloth masks, and we wore gloves, and we were pretty good about being able to stay out of each other's space. There were times when I realized that people were closer than 6 feet to each other, but just for the most part, everybody was pretty good about staying away from each other. We had to open up envelopes, a lot of envelopes, and touch a lot of those kind of things. So, I mean, there's potential that there's viruses on some of those things. There was lots of effort to try to minimize any infection there. The vast majority of the voters that came in had masks on. Most of them were homemade masks, which was cool to see the different homemade masks. But I'm concerned that, of course, that a lot of people didn't get to vote. When I was outside doing curbside voting, I had one person who was walking his dog by and said, "What, is there voting today?" And we said, "Yeah." And he said, "But I saw in the headlines that it was postponed." And it's exactly what I expected, because they got big headlines that Evers postponed the election, and really small, much later in the day, noticed that the election was back on. And then the same thing with, the things with people being able to send in their ballots without any witnesses. Those ballots are yet to come in, and all the ones we'd gotten early, and that was before the court order that you could do it without a witness. And so they're going to have to call every one of those people and try to get them to come back to the polls today and bring and then get their thing witnessed. And then the other problem is just that a lot of people thought that they have a whole other week to get their absentee ballots in, and they don't. And so I think there's a lot of confusion out there by the voters, and a lot of people aren't going to be able to get their ballots in.
Yeah, I want to turn to Richard here, because I know a lot of that you were dealing with a lot of that confusion, on the front lines with the competing court rulings. Can you tell me a little bit about what you were doing today, and where do things stand now?
Well, Doug Poland and I, who's a Madison attorney, we represented a group of organizations who were primarily voting rights organizations and get out the vote organizations working in different communities, including the Latino and African American communities in Milwaukee, plus League of Women Voters. And we've brought a lawsuit to the court trying to get the court to postpone the election and also postpone and extend the time frame in which voters could apply for and also return their absentee ballots. And as you know, Judge Conley granted some limited relief in allowing voters to return the ballots by April 13th. Yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court limited that somewhat in terms of saying that voters had to have those ballots postmarked by tomorrow, but they still have to be returned by the 13th. So, I mean, today we've basically been telling voters that, you're pretty much safe as long as you, get your ballots in postmarked today. And we were also telling them that it's probably even better if they just bring it straight to their polling site or to the clerk's office and deposit the ballots there. the biggest problem we had, and we've heard this from hundreds of people today calling and complaining to both the Wisconsin Election Protection hotline and the Democratic Party's hotline, that they requested absentee ballots and they either didn't get them or they just got them maybe today or yesterday, and they have no way of trying to get those back by today. But the biggest problem, of course, though, is those folks who haven't even gotten their ballots yet.
Mhm.
And we have a unprecedented, there's been over 1.2 million absentee ballot requests. No, it's true, most of the clerks have pretty much caught up in terms of sending them out, but they didn't catch up until recently. So there's scores of thousands of absentee ballots that have been that are just unaccounted for. We don't know where they are in terms of whether or not they're still en route to the voter's house or whether they're sitting in the voter's house. We just don't know where they are. Obviously, if they've been returned, they should be good. And that was some of the relief we got from the court, and even the Supreme Court U.S. Supreme Court still allowing that to stand. So those are the questions. I mean, in Milwaukee, I would say, there's been long lines, and in some cases 1 to 2 hour waits, which is not good, but voters are being very patient. They are waiting in line to vote. People take the right to vote very seriously. And, the best slogan I saw today was posted by a friend of mine who works with a lot of the fast food workers. And she said, people died for the right to vote. People died for the right to vote. People died for the right to vote, not for the right to die voting.
Mm.
And I thought that really summed up the experience, in terms of where we're at today. Some of the high schools in Milwaukee, it's just incredible because we have 70 wards in each high school that are voting. 70 wards in one place. And I do credit the election commission. They did an unbelievable organizational job in terms of organizing that, having it run smoothly, getting people through, doing it in what seems to be as safe as it possibly could be. People are social distancing. There are workers who are kind of wiping down the voting booths and wiping down the tables after people, go vote.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we're at. We'll see what happens. I think one of the things that may be a byproduct of what we've done, I know a lot of people were disheartened by the decisions of the 2 Supreme Courts that came down yesterday in terms of like a 1-2 gut punch. There's no question about that, from both the Wisconsin Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court in a matter of about an hour. But I will say this. I do think all the work that we did, the litigation, the lawsuits, all the agitation we did about trying to get the election postponed, even though we didn't get it postponed, I think what we did was we kind of forced the entire state to focus their attention on the fact that there's an election today, and people were thinking about the election. And when they found out what they had to do in order to participate in that election, I think we actually may end up incredibly, despite all the obstacles, with not a horrible turnout, with a pretty healthy turnout. So, things work in funny ways sometimes. And, I do think the work we've done, I know Tim's group, Building Unity, put a lot of effort and work into this. The fact that we could end up with close to 1.5 million people voting is amazing. It is truly amazing. And it shows the, people's, impulse to try to participate and exercise the franchise and exercise the right to vote, that folks take it very, very, very seriously. So, I know we're disappointed in the fact that we had to do this today, that we were basically ordered to go vote in person by 2 Supreme Courts where they made decisions telling us to do that. when they met, when they weren't even willing themselves to meet together to do it, but they were telling hundreds of thousands of voters that they had to go congregate in crowded buildings in order to vote, but they couldn't even meet themselves to deliberate over a decision, which, you know, is quite, you know, not more than ironic, hypocritical. So that's kind of where we're at. And,
Are there any efforts to take anything else to the courts? Is anything still pending, or has the dust settled? Are people going to challenge the legitimacy of this election, for instance?
I mean, and that is definitely something we're looking at, and it's part of the reason why we're trying to collect so much information about what's going on today, is to try to see if in fact the failure of the court to order the relief we asked for resulted in the disenfranchisement of a significant section of the electorate. And it's really too early to tell whether that'll be the case. But, you know, that's certainly something that Judge Conley left open in his order. In footnote 17 of his order, he said, I'm not granting the voting rights groups the relief that they requested, but I am reserving the right to revisit the issue after the election, and they can bring a post-election challenge if they want. And if they can make a showing that the fact that the election was held in the course of this pandemic resulted in the disenfranchisement of a large chunk of the electorate. I don't think it's be the kind of thing where he would invalidate the election if we only show that, you know, maybe 5 or 10,000 people didn't have the right to vote. I mean, we're going to have to show that this was truly on a massive scale. And it's really too early to tell whether that in fact occurred.
And how is that information collected? And when will that information be available?
Well, the information, it's really, we're collecting it in, you know, all different kinds of ways. I mean, part of the ways we're collecting it is just from the complaints that come into Wisconsin Election Protection and the Democratic Party's own election protection program. It's going to be, you know, we're going to have to examine the returns that they come in terms of the absentee ballots and the in-person voting. And we also have to look at where those votes are coming in from. So, for example, you know, the turnout statewide may be good, but if the results are incredibly depressed in amongst certain vulnerable populations or minority communities. So, for example, if the Black community has a 20% turnout because of all this, but the rest of the state has a 50 or 60% turnout. I mean, that says something. And even though the overall turnout was good, if there were certain groups that were not allowed to participate in the election because of the circumstances they faced and the history of discrimination that it's been imposed upon them, then we may, we'll have to look at that. But it's really way too early to tell.
Got it. Kelly, do you have a sense of how many people were registering to vote in person today, or how many had planned to vote absentee but then realized theirs weren't going to get there in time and had to vote in person instead?
No, we didn't ask that of people. Those are the kind of things you're not necessarily supposed to ask. We definitely had maybe a dozen people drop off absentee ballots at the polls. We had another, dozen or so do curbside voting, but it's really hard to know. We had, maybe half a dozen, 10 that registered to vote, not very many. But I don't think my polling place was anything even close to what was going on in Milwaukee. They had 71 wards at one location. We had one ward at our location. Ours was really, I don't know why we had so many poll workers when Milwaukee couldn't even get enough to open up a few.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Will you be a poll worker again next year or in November?
Yeah, I think I will. Yeah. Our chief inspector was really good, and I think I'd like to work there again. Yeah.
Awesome. Dan or Tim, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I can add a few things. I did go out. I had to go to the grocery store. My wife and I purposely drove by this morning by our close by one of the 5 polls in Milwaukee, and the lines were long, but I'll echo what was said earlier. They were really quite orderly. People were wearing masks and gloves. I think there was a sense of people being patient. And I was just really pleased with that. I mean, I was really concerned about it. And I feel that our elections are being run as safe as they could be given the terrible circumstance. A colleague of mine, part of the video team that I'm with, is working with Souls to the Polls. And he visited several polling sites and conducted some interviews and found that people, and this was in the central city, primarily the African-American community, and people were showing up. They expressed regret that the polls were not closed, but they said, essentially echoing what was said, they felt that this was their responsibility to vote. So I think we had a good turnout in terms of that. One comment that I heard, and I've been listening to the news, we don't know what the turnout is going to be. For my friend who interviewed folks, they were anywhere from 5 or 10 minutes to half an hour. There could have been longer, I don't know. But they said they were thinking that if there was a half an hour or about, that could indicate a low turnout, given the fact that 170 polls were being crammed into 5. So to have a heavy turnout, you'd need to have a lot of people there. Mm-hmm. And we won't find out until a few days, maybe a week or so, before we really understand what the impact was. But by and large, I was very concerned, and I'm feeling in what Kelly was saying in Madison. I think our elections went as safely as they could be. I'm proud of the work that our poll people were doing, and I think we should all be thankful for that.
Yeah, I definitely am. I was making some phone calls today, phone banking, trying to reach out to some of the people who had requested an absentee ballot but had not yet returned it, to tell them, amidst all the confusion of information, that today really was the last day that they could postmark that. And the first 5 or 6 people I talked to had all happened to had requested it and had not yet received it, but weren't sure if they felt comfortable going in person and had to really think about what they were going to do. And then I talked to a lot of other people who, got it in yesterday, got it in this morning, I'm ready to go. So I'm really not sure how things are going to shake out. But after I got done calling, I was just so jittery and nervous and outraged that this was happening, but also confined to my house that me and a housemate who I'm sheltering at home with decided to create a little music video, a Tiny Desk submission. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but I don't have a lot of musical talent, but I felt like I needed to do something to express how I was feeling. So that's what I did at home today. That was my voting day experience while I waited to hear what was happening outside my windows. Tim, I think you're the last one we haven't heard from.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for all the great work you've been doing, and the folks in Milwaukee, Richard, that you pulled together an amazing team of activists and worked really hard. And it's been heartbreaking to see your work ignored, even when the governor finally joined on. All the measures we're taking now, wearing masks when we leave our homes, closing our public schools, there was no reason except voter suppression that this couldn't have been delayed for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, giving people a chance to do the one rational thing, which is to make sure that everybody gets to vote by mail. That system works in other states. It's cheaper. It brings out larger numbers, and it's hack proof. It's the way we have to go. And I think the major thing that Building Unity wants to do, and hopefully we'll be working with lots of groups on this throughout this year, is to really promote voting by mail so that we don't have to put great people like Kelly at risk come November if there's a second wave of this pandemic or if it lingers into November. And God knows we cannot postpone the November elections under no circumstances. So we got caught, with very short timing, and anyone with, as far as I'm concerned, anyone with any degree of common sense realizes this was not usual conditions. We weren't ready. Most people don't know how to register on their smartphone or request an absentee ballot or vote that way. Most people don't do that in the past, but we're going to have to learn, and I think it's going to be our job to make sure that all Wisconsin residents know how to do this in the months to come.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder that that this is going to happen again in November, and we need to prepare now and be smarter about vote by mail and moving things forward so that this doesn't happen again. Okay, does anyone have any last comments? If not, I think we'll wrap things up and let everyone get on with the rest of their days.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Keep up the good work.